is Killian Hobbs, and welcome back to the second episode of Coffee Shop Philosophy. As you know, I'm the journalism director at think-liberty.com. I make sure to visit the site, check the bell to be able to get all of the up-to-date articles as they are posted. You can listen to our various podcasts on all your different feeds. We're available pretty much everywhere. We have a specialty shirt on for $15 that's normally available only for $20. If you were using the Venezuelan currency, that'd be a difference of about 1.2 million bolivar. So do make sure to check out the shop to take advantage of that. I think that's about all the plugs, other than follow us on all of our different social media feeds. Pretty much if it exists, we're there. If it doesn't, let us know. On today's episode, I wanted to dive into human complexity. I know, right? We're going for the softball topics. What I'm referring to is just the general complexity of human beings. Now, I'm not going to specifically refer to, say, how complicated we are when it comes to one particular aspect of our lives. So I'm not going to dive into, this complications of human sexuality or human interaction or this, that, or the next thing, but rather the topic of complexity itself. Now, there's tons of different examples I could use to dive into this, but I'm going to use one that you probably weren't expecting. Needlecraft. Yeah, I know. You're all stopping and saying, what the hell you mean needlecraft? What are you going on about? But this is a perfect example of the complexity of humans, or at least the way humans make things complex. So when you look at something like knitting, you wouldn't think of it as something exceedingly complex. And yet, if you tried to become involved, you'll have no idea where to start. There's something like 7 different versions of needles that you can use, all of which have varying lengths by the centimeter, by the hook sizes, by the material that you use. All of those different things come into play, and that's before you even come into pattern types. So when you're actually doing the knitting, it involves something like 35 different patterns, all of which have tons and tons of sub-patterns to each particular type. And if that's not weird enough, that's just one form of needlecraft. The entire school of needlecraft encompasses something like 14 different types of usage of needles and yarn and string and things like that. Now, I know what you're thinking. What the hell did Killian take today that he wanted to go on about knitting? But I think that it's a perfect example of the way that humans make things complex. So here we take something as simple as, you take a hook and 2 hooks and some yarn, and you start to make a scarf or something like that, or put together a sweater. And all of a sudden we've turned it into this massive hobby where we need to categorize everything and add all of these different layers of understanding of knowledge, where it could take you years just to learn all of the background information required to truly comprehend this stuff before you actually get any experiential knowledge. And we do this with practically everything. Name a topic, name a concept, name something that you like, and chances are, if humans have found a way to make it exceptionally complicated. I mean, take what this show's named after, not so much the philosophy side, we know that's complicated, but take a look at even coffee. Coffee itself, there's so many different areas that the beans are grown, the way that it's roasted, the temperature that it's roasted at, that matters, what it's filtered through, things that you add it to, the types of beans that are used. There's so many different things that get involved in that. And then you look at the evolution of the markets that are involved with it, the evolution of the different chains, the things that they promote, the things they stand for, the rise of the entire concept, organic free trade coffee. You can take any one topic that humans have touched, and you can find yourself spending years diving into that particular concept, that particular idea, that particular object, that particular whatever it is that you're worried about that day. I find this particularly fascinating. The reason being is that humans like to view things in simple ways. We take a look at everything. We like to have a simpler life. We like to have things uncomplicated. We like to have things more simplified. We like to have things easier. We like to have things done in a way that our lives are uncomplicated because of the way that we do them. But in trying to devise the different ways to make things uncomplicated, we've added so many different layers to how we do everything that everything's become even more complicated than it used to be. You can name literally any topic. Take your time, do your homework. You can name any topic, and you'll find that there are depths and layers to it that you've probably never bothered to comprehend. Maybe you're an expert in your field. Maybe you're the foremost expert on a particular topic, and you are the person that everyone goes to for information. Chances are there are still things that you do not know about the topic to which you are the foremost expert. Even people who are absolute geniuses when it comes to physics, mathematics, when it comes to, various students of philosophy, when it comes to even cooking or something like that. There are massive, vast wealths of knowledge that people haven't even touched. And in those wealths of knowledge, there's humans adding layer upon layer upon layer upon layer of complication as they take any one aspect they can and stretch it out as far as that one person can take it. Take something as simple as, take something like political philosophy. Here you have it where the old world of political philosophy was quite literally pro the king, anti the king. That was the origin of the left-right divide. The right were in favor of the government of the king, of the monarchy, whereas the left was in favor of revolution. That was the origin of these terms. And then you think of the way that everything is evolving, the way that these terms have come to change. I mean, if you told someone in the 19th century that libertarianism was going to be related to capitalists, they would have just laughed in your face. But these terms have changed. We've taken these terms over, just as you can have an authoritative aspect of the left when the whole formation of the left was to be anti-authority. And we've added, let's see, there's probably about 20 different sub-schools of anarchy that exist. There's countless forms of organization of government. There's even different forms and degrees of dictatorship and authoritarianism, all of which, because with every minute difference and minute change that we implement, test, and try, we add a new layer to this topic. We complicate this topic. Now, all of this can seem very, I wouldn't say overwhelming. I would say interesting, but I wouldn't say overwhelming, because humans don't get overwhelmed by this. Humans have a way of adapting to these types of changes. It's our species' ability to adapt that has given us the ranking we have at the top of the food chain. We have the ability to adapt because we have something known as neuroplasticity. Now, I've always found neuroplasticity to be a very interesting topic because it seems like such a circular thing. Your experiences change the way you think and they change the way you view the world and the way you act. But the brain, being organic, you can actually train your brain just the same way you would a muscle. So your experiences shape the way that you see and think the world because your brain tells you to go do things. And by doing those things, you rewire your own brain. It's sort of, for any of the members in the audience out there, for any of you that have learned an extra language, for example, you'll find that if you know more than one language, even if you were just, raised bilingual, you'll have a far easier time learning languages than someone who has only ever spoken, say, English. Just the same if you, at a younger age, start practicing using your left hand instead of your right hand or vice versa, you'll find that you'll keep that ambidexterity later on, and it's not just a muscle memory thing. You've rewired your brain to work that way. The origin of the studies on this comes from a very shocking place, or at least in my eyes it was shocking. It actually came from Buddhist monks. Get this. So, for those unfamiliar, Buddhism has a concept where the self is not permanent. The self is constantly changing, constantly evolving, going through different cycles. And they also have a concept where you can train yourself to be more compassionate. By practicing compassion and meditating on compassion and thinking, acting, breathing on being a more compassionate and caring human being, you can be a more compassionate human being by just default, where it doesn't even involve thinking about it anymore. Now, unlike a lot of other religions, now, personally, I consider Buddhism to be a total life philosophy, and they just didn't have a better term for it at the time when the Westerners came over, but that's another story for another episode. They're the only religion that said, you know what, let's test this against science. If facts disprove what Buddhism believes, then Buddhism has to change. That's a quote from the Dalai Lama when he first started getting involved in the studies that led to these discoveries. So what they did was they tested the brains of Buddhist monks. They used MRI machines and they ran through things and they had them meditate on the concept of compassion. And they found that key components in the brain lit up almost 10 times as much as they did in a normal human brain. Now, this was the first bit of testing that they did on this concept, but other tests in neuroplasticity, such as the test of using your left arm more to rewire the brain, using your senses in different and unique ways in order to increase your overall brain capacity, the entire idea of a brain age and the fact that you can retrain your brain to be more intelligent or to operate faster just by using it like you would a muscle. All of these things proved concepts that Buddhism had been practicing for years. Again, such as there's no such thing as a constant self, because your brain generates your personality. Your brain generates the mind that is who you are on a day-to-day basis. I'm not going to get into conversations about souls or anything like that. I'm just going to keep it in the realm of science for the sake of not turning this into a 5-hour back and forth with myself. With this concept, you change when your brain changes. Because of fluctuations in your brain chemistry, it changes who you are from moment to moment. Even alterations based on, changes in brain chemistry, from changes in your diet, amounts of exercise, if you partake in drugs, any of those things can change both your brain chemistry and who you are. Who you are as a person is constantly changing. And this comes from your brain rewiring itself through your own experiences. So this entire idea of neuroplasticity proves the concept that the brain is constantly changing. The brain can be rewired. You're not stuck with the brain you had the day you were born. You can improve on it. You can train it. You can become smarter. You can boost your IQ. Your personality can change. All because of this concept, this scientifically proven concept. Now, tying it back into the human complexity aspect, it's this neuroplasticity that allows us to complicate things to the degree that we do while still thinking we're simplifying things. Let's take a look at the massive expansion in technology. We take a look at some of the technology that we use these days, from smart TVs to our phones to all of the advances on computers, and we can see very clearly a lot of complex mechanisms and a lot of things to learn that we just consider secondhand at this point. Take a moment to consider how many things you know how to do on a computer or on your smartphone. Hell, the fact that you know how to do as many things as you do on both of those platforms is a sign of how complex human beings can make things while still viewing it as simplified. Take something as simple as changing your ringtone. Everyone and their mother knows how to change a ringtone on their phone these days. But in order to do so, you need to go and download the song. You need to transfer it onto the phone. You need to know how to locate the song in the storage on the phone, or have the appropriate app, which app to go with. You need to know how to go into the settings in order to go into the subsetting for sound and the subsetting for notifications and the subsetting to select the type of ringtone you want. Back in the old days, you had to know how to use a converter in order to turn it into a ringtone applicable format. And this was all just click, 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 done. It's not something that requires a whole bunch of mental effort to figure out how to do, or something that you even need to worry about memorizing. And yet it's a complex list of things that you need to do in order to accomplish that one task. And think of the thousands of things that you know how to do on a smartphone, whether it's any of the apps that you might play on, or any of the apps that you might use for, fitness tracking, for productivity tracking. They have entire copies of Office available on smartphones now that you can just use. And yet these things simplify our lives. all of these complex subroutines that we learn and get to a point of efficiency where we're not even thinking about how we have to do something anymore. We just go click, 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 done. And at that point, we don't have to worry about it anymore. We consider adding all of these steps and all of these things we need to learn in order to accomplish one or two small things a simplification rather than a complication. And that's just because of humans being humans. We have this ability where if we make something our norm, then we don't have to worry about it anymore. And it doesn't matter how complex we make that norm. Another great example of human complexity would be dining etiquette. I'll jump into this one shortly. Dining etiquette, there's the way that you lay out the spoons, the way you lay out the knives, the forks, the order that the meals need to come in, the way the bowls and glasses and cups need to be placed, the way that servers are supposed to bring things to the table. Think of the people that came up with this. And there's people out there that they can set a table to that by memory just because that's their norm. They don't have to think about it. It's not something complex in their mind because they've done it so many times that it's become a simple task. Some of you out there, you're probably, it's a libertarian podcast, so I know I'm hitting home on a few people here. Some of you are gun owners. Think about how complicated it was dismantling, cleaning, and putting a gun back together the first time that you tried it. Chances are now you probably time yourself to see how fast you can do the whole process from start to finish, and you get faster every time you do it. It's not something that's alien to you anymore. It's not something that's complex. It's not something that's difficult to do. It's something that is almost too simplistic considering how many components are involved. And this is true no matter who you talk to. There are people you'll meet that they'll know how to go through the complex steps of any multitude of things that would leave you just completely bewildered because you don't have the experience or you don't have the direct knowledge of the topics that they do. Just the same, they may not know half of the things that you do when it comes to your areas of expertise, your areas where the complications have become simplistic. Tying this back to my previous episode, what I find fascinating with this is that here we have it with humans where we go off the deep end into our own areas of interest, and yet we can almost always find common ground with each other. We always have the ability to have a conversation, and we can communicate these topics with each other and understand each other completely perfectly. Now, that's not to say that there aren't disagreements that take place. Obviously, there's debates that happen constantly. People have arguments back and forth about their interpretations of how things need to be or how things ought to be. But we have it where we can still communicate these ideas on common grounds. We have the ability to take our complicated knowledge and turn it into something more marketable, turn it into something more concise. We can take all of these complications, and because of the way our brains work, we can turn these into simplistic notions. You might have seen if you ever go on Reddit or anything like that, you might have seen the constant posts in the subthread there, explain it like I'm 5, from that quote from I think it was The Office that quote came from, where people go into highly advanced topics, but they explain it in such simplistic terms that quite literally a 5-year-old could get it. I mean, they take a concept like string theory, advanced physics, and the idea of string theory, and they'll explain it as simple as universe is tied together by string-like things that vibrate different ways, and that makes the universe tick. Boom. You've taken the entire concept and simplified it in such a way that we can communicate this base concept to each other with next to no efforts. So even though we might have all of the background information that gives us tons and tons of minute details related to what we know and what we are experts in, we can still take all that information, compact it, and share it with each other with next to no issue. We can take something as complex as having picked, material number 7, hook size number 43, patterns 12, 14, and 32, sub pattern 128, 135, 147, and we made a pretty bitchin' scarf that we can hand off to someone we love. The human brain takes any topic it becomes attached to and finds ways to become more and more specific with it. We add these details, we add these levels of complexity to everything that we touch, but we always do it in a way where we can bring it back and simplify it for the purposes of exchanging the information with other people. What's fascinating with this aspect of human complexity is that we don't do this for any purpose other than communication. We don't need to simplify how something works in our own mind if we've already trained ourselves to understand how it works. We don't need to create internal shortcuts to understand something that we're doing practically from muscle memory, where we're not even actively thinking about how we do it. Take another good example would be driving. Driving involves a lot of complex mental tasks happening in order. You might remember back when you were first learning to drive how tense you were, trying to understand, the exact amount of pressure that you need to put on the gas pedal, on the brake pedal, being able to watch your overall speed, the amount that the wheel needs to turn, being able to check your mirrors properly, being able to be comfortable in that, change lanes properly, merge properly. Not to mention the litany of road laws that you need to know and constantly observe, even though, let's be honest, most of us don't observe all of them at all times, but at least we're aware of what they are, along with the signs that we need to follow, what all these different pictogrammic images mean. We take all of that, and at this point, we travel on cruise control. We hop in the car, start driving. I'm sure you've all had a moment where you'll start driving somewhere and you'll forget mid-drive how you covered a certain distance because it's become such an autopilot thing for you that you don't even need to think about the actions that you're taking. It's not something that takes a true conscious effort anymore. It's become so normalized for you that it's become a subroutine. This is the brain rewiring itself. Like I mentioned with neuroplasticity, your brain doesn't need you to think actively about this, despite how complex of a task it truly is. Last one that I'm going to dive into here, just to wrap the whole point up, would be, at this point, go back and re-listen to this podcast. You'll hear me go through all of these different steps, and at each step, I will describe all of the sub-layers. When I talked about driving, I mentioned, this, that, this, that, this, that. When I talked about knitting, this, that, this, that, this, that, this, that. When I talked about smartphone technology, this, that, this, that. In all of these cases, I was using those as examples of how these complexities stretch out. But when you're remembering this episode, if you consider what I've said to be memorable in any way, shape, or form, you'll remember that I touched on 4 or 5 key examples, and that the end result of what I said was that humans find ways to make things more complex and compact it to make it simple, and that's because of our own neurochemistry. The entire episode can be summarized in that sentence, and I think that that might be the best example of how humans work. Like I said, though, there is one last thing, actually. I need to complicate it a little further and go that one further step here. One last thing that I would like to cover going through all of this is, again, the communication side. Like I mentioned in the last episode, communication is one of the most powerful things that we as a species have. It's the only reason that we've made it as far as we have as a species. So when you have moments where you're the resident expert on something, where you're the one with all of the complex information and the advanced knowledge on a topic, it's important to remember that the person you're talking to may not have that knowledge. They may not have that level of expertise. However, the more complex something is and the better you understand it, the easier it is for you to explain it to people who don't know. And you can start them on their journey of further understanding these topics, of reaching the level of complexity that you personally have taken something. Albert Einstein was once famously quoted for saying, "If you cannot explain something simply, that means you do not understand it completely." Now, I'm paraphrasing here, but that's the core of what his quote was. And I think that when it comes to effective speaking, or when it comes to communicating ideas and packaging our complexities into these more palatable doses, that it's key to make sure that the understanding that we have is actually at a level where we can condense these topics effectively enough to truly communicate how much is involved and how much goes into this. Now, last thought that I'll leave you on. Last week I asked people to chime in and hit me back if you had any particular activities you're going to take on for the little challenge that I left for you. I suggested to everybody, try something new every month. By the time this episode airs, it'll be about a day or two before the start of September. So again, you can reach out to us on social media. I want to hear from everybody if they're going to start something and partake in this particular program. At the end of the month, I'll go through all of the different things that people have learned about. And who knows, maybe you'll become enough of an expert in the topic you take on this month that you can talk to me and try to simplify it for me. So, before we go here, again, we're available on pretty much every form of social media. If you haven't seen us on there, just follow us. If we're not there, let us know. We have a t-shirt on promo. You can follow us on our website, think-liberty.com, and hit the little bell to subscribe. And you can listen to our podcasts on pretty much every single platform. Hopefully that was simple enough for everybody. And if you liked what you heard today, I'll see you next week.